from phase 1 to 2 to 3, along with each transition, there are a lot of changes happening. So I'm sure there are a lot of um, pain internally to drive those changes. So, what are the trigger points for thinking about those changes? Can you tell us a little bit more on hindsight what triggers those, and so that our audience can leverage? Oh, those is the signs or signals where we should think about the transitioning from one phase to the other.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think when you're going from phase one to phase two, so I said that's a transition where you have reached product market fit. I'd say the first thing is that the phase one is such a great sweet spot. So try to stay in that as long as possible. And I think Plaid really tried to stay in that as long as possible, where you're really small and lean and communication overhead is low. And so if you can stay in that sweet spot without customers churning, it's really efficient and it's just like such a great place to be. But when you get to product market fit, and I think as an aside, a failure mode is assuming you've gotten a product market fit a little bit too early. So sometimes you think that if you've reached a certain funding milestone or a certain number of customers, that's product market fit. But really, it's like you've reached product market fit where there's like tons of customer pull and your team really can't keep up with the demand. So you start seeing tons of bugs and feature requests, and your backlog is growing and growing, and you just can't keep up, right? And to me, that's where you get to product market fit. So that's one leading indicator is your feature backlog growing. The second is like, the way we kind of handle that for a really long time is by extreme focus. And so talked about the single backlog, but what the single backlog also means is you're saying no to a lot of high ROI things because they're not the highest ROI. And so that's fine for a while. It's really great for focus. It keeps your platform really focused as well. But it does start to eat away at your NPS, right? Your customers are getting said no to for things that are really legitimate asks, right? And that doesn't feel great after a while, right? So that's another indicator is like customer sentiment and NPS. NPS is a very lagging indicator, but you can start to feel that sentiment from customers. And then probably the third one is what I talked about with Dunbar's number is just your number of paths it takes to get anything done. And one thing we saw is like, it used to be that an account manager or somebody that's customer facing could just reach out to one person and get an answer about how a product worked or, why a certain bug was happening. But after a while, when the complexity of our teams went up, you would see people just hopping around Slack saying like, do you own this? No. And then they get routed to another team. And so you can kind of see like if somebody's getting routed around and nobody has true ownership of something, that's another sign that you don't have the right interfaces internally. And so we were seeing all of that. And I think that's what led us to say, like, we need to really spin up teams in order to have like stable interfaces and stable investments. Say yes more to customers, but also be more efficient about how we route things internally.
How did your role evolve through these things? And I think specifically, I'm looking for like, because I guess what was probably asked of you or how you had to rise to meet the different changing leadership challenges with all of these different phase changes. Like you probably had to learn a lot, grow a lot. What were some of those inflection points for you, and how did that opportunity come to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's probably another one of these things where you don't realize it's sort of happening in the moment. But I think going back a little bit to my history, I started my career as an engineer at Disney Imagineering, and I think one of the things that I really learned there was Imagineering was a place where you'd hire engineers that sort of were very creative, had to think about product and design and engineering at the same time. And so I got to work with really, really talented engineers there, but I think it also was a very non-functional place, right? Meaning that there weren't a ton of specific functions to handle things like product and design. So it kind of forced you to think about many sides of the end product all at the same time. And so, I think my nature was to kind of think that way as I sort of grew up in my career working in video games and even in B2B products was really the end business impact or the end user impact is my job and the thing that I had to think about. So even though at Plaid I started in 2017 as an eng manager and started to like work on organizational things, started to really focus on recruiting in the first couple of years. The eventual path took me to thinking about the business as a whole, just because I think I by nature kind of looked for what is the biggest problem we needed to solve, whether it was engineering or not. So a couple of, like personal inflection points. I think one thing that I hadn't really ever done before was start a new office. And, I think second year into Plaid, it was very much like, we need to scale quickly. Can't do it in San Francisco. Let's start a new office. And that role was, I'd say like almost 99% recruiting, 1%, talking to different cities and understanding like which one was going to be the best fit for us. But it's very much like not strictly engineering. After that, it was really like, hey, there's a bunch of demand for new products for customers really want Plaid to build new things, and it was spinning up a couple of different new product groups. And that was a ton of organization, a lot of engineering work, but also thinking about the product side a lot and product strategy. And then, more recently, it's like as we split into business units, we see a need for our core business to really, continue to strengthen our core products, but also meet the needs of an expanding fintech ecosystem and innovate on things that will like take us to the next sort of phase of growth. And so, again, I think having some of the longevity of Plaid and being able to balance engineering and product and go to market, I think that's led me to sort of fit into that role really well. And it's a transition I went through over the last year. I'd say one sort of key inflection point or learning. I remember a conversation I had with Jean Denis of, sometime last year, I was kind of sitting back and looking at what I was working on. And I made the comment, I was like, I don't think a lot of this is really engineering focused, right? It doesn't seem super relevant to the engineering team. And he kind of just paused and looked at me and was like, that is your job. It doesn't matter if it's engineering or not. You need to fix these problems. And I think it was a mindset shift for me. And it was really helpful feedback, but I think it kind of framed that like there's a bunch of seams in an organization. It doesn't matter whether they're engineering or not, but I really need to kind of look for those seams and those opportunities and make sure they're addressed, whether that's in my job description or not.
I love the concept of like asking the question of what is the biggest problem, and all roads essentially lead towards challenges with the business. And then the quote, look for the seams. And I think the seams is a really apt description of some of those opportunities. And going back to starting a new office, what was that like? And why Salt Lake City, and like in that moment, and what'd you learn from that experience?
Yeah, it was a really fun and rewarding experience. The Salt Lake City office today is about 120 people. It's a great office, super passionate, has a really unique culture, and they're a super fun group. So kind of looking back on it, great experience. I think in the moment, what the reason we took it on was we have this part of our business that just needs to scale horizontally really quickly, and that's the integrations with banks. So we cover tens of thousands of banks, and in 2017 we were looking at like what does that need to look like in terms of scale, and we really thought for us to succeed, for us to win the market, we probably needed to grow that team to 50 to 100 engineers over the next couple of years. And at that time, we were really just growing the team at like 1 or 2 engineers a quarter, right? It was the pace of hiring was kind of slow. One, because we were really careful about growing the team, but two, there was a ton of other companies in San Francisco at hyperscale, right? So Uber and Stripe and Airbnb competing against all of those. And as an early stage startup without a ton of brand recognition, it was kind of hard to grow at the pace we needed. So that led us to think about a bunch of different strategies. If you're going to essentially like 50x your hiring speed, you need to think a little bit differently. So we started thinking about, should we offshore? Should we hire a remote team? Should we open another office? Should we, move to South Bay? There was a bunch of things we considered, and we landed on wanting to have an in-office experience in a different city for a couple different reasons. I think one is that, for the type of work we do, very high trust, high sensitivity of data, we really wanted people to be in an office so you could kind of have the right training programs, you could build trust within the team. So that was really important. I think second, we just didn't think we could do it at scale in San Francisco. I think all the challenges I mentioned, but we thought there's pockets of cities where Plaid is a really compelling sort of story. It's like, Bay Area startup, you get to work on a really important mission. And we thought that might be an attractive kind of pitch for candidates in certain markets. And so the way we kind of tested that is like, we picked a few markets, and our criteria we wanted something that fit culturally with Plaid. And one of those things was like, we like to be builders, and so we didn't want to go into a city that we considered finished. We really wanted to be part of a growing tech city, and I think that kind of ruled out cities like Austin or Seattle. I think Denver at that time was starting to feel like more of a finished product, and so we started looking at more at like cities like Salt Lake City, Boise, like even LA. I think as a tech city is a little bit up and coming, but we also wanted a city to be close enough to foster great connections and have people be able to make day trips really easily, sort of back and forth. And so that led us to a handful of cities close to the West Coast. And then really is like testing the market, just like you would with an MVP. We sent out a bunch of reach outs, had a bunch of early calls with candidates, and got to test market demand. And so we had a bunch of filters, and Salt Lake City ended up winning for a few reasons. I think one, amazing city. The airport's super close to downtown. It's just such a beautiful city, and so a lot of our team already really loved going out there. I personally was part of leading this search, and I'm from Salt Lake City, so I will admit there was maybe like 5% of just my bias coming in, but I think ultimately it was really like, what's the best match for our culture and will help the business scale, and that's what led us to Salt Lake City.
The proxy to use the tech ecosystem and how that's evolving, or like the state of maturity of the tech ecosystem, is like a proxy for the culture that you're looking for. That to me, I'm like, that's genius. Like, that's amazing. So I thought that was really great. And then the analogy of testing the market like an MVP. I'm also going to Salt Lake City next week, so there's a little bit of my bias in there. I was like, I'm very big on the Mountain West right now as an emerging tech scene, Boise, Salt Lake City. So I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a great ecosystem. It's definitely pumped out a bunch of unicorns, but it's very much a growing ecosystem, and we've had a chance to grow along with it, and it's been super rewarding.